Well, first, guys, thanks very much for coming. This is a terrific panel, and I'm really happy to be able to moderate it. But yeah, so I guess we can get right into it and start with the star of the show, the iPhone 5. So I'd love to hear, you guys were there, you got to see it in person and on stage. I'd love to hear what your first impressions are of the new product. So start with you.
Surprisingly lightweight.
Yeah.
Very lightweight. Like, more noticeable than the change in physical size is the change in heft. Feels very solid, very well made, but just seems almost fake how lightweight it is.
Okay, neat.
Yeah, it's not that often that you have a lightweight device that feels solid and well made, but this definitely does. The other thing that you notice is that you don't notice the extra increase in screen size. I mean, it's got a 4-inch display. It's a pretty considerable bump up over the 3.5 inches, but it still feels exactly in your hand like the iPhone 4 in terms of its dimensions. So you've got extra real estate, more usable real estate, but it doesn't really feel bulky or unwieldy.
So you don't feel like you're reaching or like you're straining your hand at it?
No, it doesn't seem to be. I mean, we've had very limited time with the thing, and ultimately, we'll have to see how things go over the long term, but so far, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an iPhone, and it still feels appreciably like an iPhone. And who would have thought that Apple would have made their iPhone a little bit thinner and a little bit lighter? I mean, this is the Apple playbook, and it doesn't seem like some strange oversized novelty iPhone. It's just the iPhone with a little bit more screen, and it is lighter. And I think something about that length makes it feel less dense, in some way, where it feels, I think, even lighter than it actually is compared to when you hold the 4S.
Well, it's no Galaxy Note, but it's. I think overall it looks pretty solid. I think the first time picking it up in the hands-on area, it's pretty amazing how light it is compared to the current iPhone, both the 4 and the 4S, and it almost feels like it's hollow on the inside. In a way, it's a pretty interesting effect. It's different from the current iPhone.
What got me first off was the screen that you can still operate it with one hand. You don't have to move your hand. You don't have to reach uncomfortably to make things work. I was with MG and we were trying out the panoramic camera, and I could reach, holding the iPhone normally, all the way to the top, and change the camera to panoramic mode, and operate it, navigate it. Everything was great. And that's one thing I was worried about. If you have a screen that's too big and it's too wide or too tall, then you can't operate it with one hand. And we really want to be able to do that.
And this will bring out the trolls for sure, but the panoramic thing is fucking awesome. It is amazing. It's really like magic. It's
like none of that pausing where you're like, okay, click, and now wait,
right,
and
now turn, and then
click.
make sure that you're aligned.
You just kind of go,
make sure you're aligned with the Empire State Building. So
slow down a little. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
All right, keep it level. Keep it level.
It
tells you to slow down if you're going too fast. Now, when you're done,
to
you
be
press the
fair,
button.
that's not the first time that we've seen stuff like that before.
No, that's true.
Certainly, cameras have offered that before, but interestingly, it's
first time we've seen Apple do something.
True. So then it is the first time we've seen it, really. But you hold it in portrait, which is interesting. So instead of holding it like you typically would if you're taking a picture, you hold it vertically, which gives you more vertical resolution for your photos. And the ones we've seen look really good.
The other thing that's important with the phone is to be able to fit it in your pocket. You don't want something, like a Galaxy Note that you need a wagon to carry it. You want something that you can use with one hand, but also I didn't try to fit it in my pocket because Apple security was surrounding me when I had it. But I just based on the pictures that we took, it looks like it would fit very comfortably.
And Jason, you mentioned it's an iPhone, right? And it's lighter and smaller, and that's something that on Twitter has been, the reaction. It's always the reaction. There's sort of a ennui, right? With like, oh, okay, they did this. It's not revolutionary. It's not something completely different. Do you think that that's a growing problem? Do you think it even is a problem for Apple, or?
Well, I mean, Apple's playing a different game than I think any other competitor in the sense that they do one phone and they do it once a year.
Yeah.
And if you compare it against a specific Android phone that you can pick, you can find lots of things that are different about it. But that's because Apple doesn't make 8 different phones and 8 different screen sizes. They're really trying to find the sweetest spot of the market and create a single product to fit it with the iPhone. And it seems to be working for them. So, and the iPhone's so successful, I think they don't want to mess with it too much. They have a philosophy, what Jim was saying about one-handing it and being able to reach the whole screen. I mean, clearly that's part of their belief is that you shouldn't have to go to the second hand because your screen's too big, and so I think that's their game plan.
And I think in one of the videos, they showed about 4 or 5 videos today, one of them talking about the behind the scenes and the making of the device itself, Johnny Ive goes out of his way to say, we know that a lot of people really love this device and we don't want to fuck it up. We don't want to change anything about it too drastically, but at the same time, we want to improve things about it. That's the way to think of it.
Well, and the fact is they upgraded all of the components inside the iPhone. So, wireless is upgraded. The A5 is now the A6 chip, so the processor's been upgraded. Everything that they could update in there has been done.
And that's something that's important to note, it's just not a sexy way to tell the story, and it's not a sexy headline because it's not some kind of new out of this world spec, but it's really, they had to re-engineer a lot of what's going on inside of the iPhone to make up for the difference in the thinness of it now and the difference in the size of it. And so they had to re-engineer the camera, for example. While they kept it at the same 8 megapixel that it was before, they had to redo all the other kind of internals because it is actually a smaller camera itself.
Yeah, and the LTE changes the power profile, and the thinness forces the connector change. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening, even though it's easy for us to just say sort of it's the iPhone, only more iPhone-y than before.
Yeah. About the, Jim, you said that they took everything they could improve and did improve. So was there anything that you guys wanted to see that you didn't see, or did you think overall they delivered?
I think NFC is one thing that a lot of people were hoping to see. We're seeing a lot of interesting movement on the mobile payment front with NFC, and Google's certainly playing there, and a lot of other people are getting in there as well. But Apple chose not to include NFC here for a few reasons that they, I think, just elaborated on all things new, actually not too long ago. So that's a little bit disappointing that they didn't include NFC or make any steps forward on mobile payments with Bluetooth 4.0. There's an opportunity to do something there as well, which they didn't do. So I think that's one thing that we would have liked to see, but we didn't. I didn't.
Tim's the nicest guy in tech, and I'm one of the worst. So I
disagree with that. You're a gentleman, sir.
I tend to disagree with Tim a little bit on NFC because I think a lot of the items that we're looking at with smartphones these days are checklist items. And right now, NFC to me is a checklist item.
Well, I think, I'm not speaking for Tim, but I think what I would have rather seen is more of like, not Phil Schiller saying we've got an NFC chip in the phone, but Eddie Q saying we've worked out payment deals with Starbucks, Target, American Airlines, this, that, and the other. And all of these people are all on board with this thing that just goes right through your pants.
Right. Whether or not it's NFC or Bluetooth 4.0, or even if it's just over the internet and it's based on my location at that time, some kind of mobile payment system.
Right.
We saw the Passbook system, which is going to be good, so that you can have your tickets and discount cards and things like that. I think that'll be a nice step forward, and ultimately that will morph into some kind of a virtual wallet. But we didn't see anything like that today.
It feels low tech though that you've got this cool new Passbook thing, and then you've got to like barcode, get the laser.
You sort of feel like Apple just isn't a believer in the NFC stuff, though, that it's just not there, and maybe they even tried to put it together and couldn't make it a good enough experience. And unlike Google saying, well, let's put it in there and see what people do, Apple doesn't play that game. Apple doesn't come out with that with NFC in it unless it's got a whole story and it's got all the partners. And I think they just punted and said, look, we can, everybody's got a scanner. Everybody's got a screen on their phone. We can do something with this, but it's not super whizzy, but it works, and it's their best shot. It's not super exciting, but it works.
And they didn't talk about it, but maybe there's things with the Bluetooth capabilities that they can do to kind of do the same type of communication, short distance communication things that they could do with NFC. They have Bluetooth, the low energy Bluetooth in there, the 4.0 that they've had since the last device, and they don't really use it for anything. And you think, like, if they have it in there, they want to use it for something. Of course, they have the headsets and all that, but they're putting it in the Apple TV, they're putting it in all these other related devices. So you think that they're probably going to do something with that more interesting down the road.
Just about, because we've got a lot of developers here, what do you think iOS 6 brings for developers that's really sort of revolutionary and that could change mobile apps? What's that?
Less Google.
Sorry?
Less Google.
Oh, less Google. Yeah, actually.
More pixels, too.
Well, if you want to address the developer things, like what's powerful there?
I would say exactly what they demoed is pure performance. And so I think the developers who will be the most affected will be game developers.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's really an exaggeration to say that it's console quality graphics.
Absolutely, and they showed something called offline. Well, it was offline co-op or multiplayer. I forget what the exact term was, but effectively, it was Real Racing 3. We were able to race against somebody even though they weren't online at the same time. And we've seen like ghost racing and car racing before, but this time you could actually bump into them and knock them off course. So it was a combination of an uploaded ghost replay plus some kind of artificial intelligence to fill in the blanks. So when you're playing mobile devices, you don't often have time to connect with your friends and play with them right at that moment. But if you can kind of take that and make that asynchronous, but still have an action game, I think that'll be an interesting thing that more developers can play with going forward. And maybe that'll be something cool in iOS 6.
Yeah, Google being sort of kicked out of the platform there. What do you guys think of that move? Is that because it does seem like it I don't know what the upside is necessarily for consumers, but maybe you guys can address that. Is there one, or do you think it's just a necessary step that Google or that Apple has to take at this point?
Is there an upside for consumers?
Yeah, I'm worried. I got to say, the thing that worries me most about iOS 6 in general is that the map stuff is going to be a feature regression, and it's going to make consumers angry.
Yeah.
Why can't I do this anymore? And I understand all the strategic reasons why Apple says we can't be yoked to Google anymore. They're a competitor. This is too key. We need to control our destiny here because that's totally the Apple plan is you got to control your destiny. But the users don't care if they can't get directions or they get led astray or the map doesn't show the store they're looking for or it doesn't show the hours or something that they're used to on their same phone and they run this update and suddenly it's just gone. That's a problem for Apple with consumers, regardless of what their strategic goals are. So that's the thing that worries me the most is, will it be a feature regression or not, and will people get kind of pissed off when they realize they can't find out when the next bus is coming to take them back home?
Have any of you guys used it? Obviously the developer betas of iOS 6 have been out there for a while, and we're not supposed to talk about it. Yeah. But theoretically, have any of you guys used it enough or seen it used enough where it's okay, it's like a fine replacement? I just haven't used it on my day-to-day phone to know if the Maps is okay.
When I was saying abstractly that I'm worried about it, that might because I've tried it and been a little worried about what I've seen and think, in the betas, the fact is Apple's probably holding the full map data, the final version for when they launch the OS. So hopefully, I really hope it's better by then, but up to now, using the developer betas, it's been a little sketchy. And it's a beta, so that's fine, but what if it ships in a state that makes the users pissed off? That's the real worry I have about the ditching Google for Maps.
What about YouTube? Do you think that...
I think YouTube, the app that they released, it looks fine. It looks, much more full-featured than the one that they had in the store, which I think everyone agreed just sucked because they didn't really touch it.
Well, because Apple wrote it. And
right, Apple wrote it.
And it was cooked into the
data.
OS, so it could never get updated except with an OS update, which was terrible for everybody, right?
And so, we'll see what they do with Maps if Google builds one, if Apple allows it. I still think, it's a huge thing for developers because obviously the iOS SDK will force you to use Apple Maps, and so that's something you're not getting around. But I can't see why. I shouldn't say I can't see why. I don't think that Apple will block it if Google does their own mappings application.
And just while we're talking about competition and competitors, Amazon had their big event last week, and Jeff Bezos was all about the ecosystem there. So Apple talked about ecosystem a bit today too. They gave some numbers on the App Store and on iTunes. What do you think? How do you think they stack up? If Amazon reframes it in that light, do you think that gives them an advantage, or does Apple still have the advantage in ecosystem?
I think the first thing you have to think about when you compare Amazon's Kindle Fire tablets against Apple's stuff, and let's just imagine that Amazon's already announced their phone too. But the biggest difference is that Amazon's media ecosystem is so heavily, it's almost completely US only.
Yeah.
And then they have a little bit in the UK. So they sell all of their stuff in the US and a couple of them to the UK, but nowhere else. Whereas Apple has deals with, I think over 100 countries for movies, apps, TV shows, books. So it's really a US-only battle between Amazon and Apple right now. I mean, I would presume that Amazon's working on that, but I think Apple has more of a lead in those negotiations with studios and TV stations and stuff like that. I think their lead is stronger there than in any kind of engineering sense.
No, I agree. I'm from Toronto, and we have nothing on Amazon. I have zero access to it.
Amazon is doing, I think, the best job out of all of Apple's competitors. But Apple was really stealthy in the way that they built the infrastructure. They started in 2001, in the iPod, and then they released the iTunes Music Store. So they've got a decade head start on most people. So it's hard for another company to come in and say, okay, we've got this tablet, but yeah, we don't have movies and TV shows, and we don't have all the things that you really want, all the content. And people see that with the iPad, the iPhone, and the Mac for that matter.
Right, and Amazon also has the content, at least in the US, as we were just talking about, and so they have that aspect of it. They're trying to come at it now from both a hardware perspective and from an OS perspective building on top of what Google made, of course. And so, it's the cliche now, but Apple really does kind of hit the home run on every aspect of the device, whereas all these other guys are coming at it from their set things. The one knock you could have on Apple is the cloud infrastructure, and I think that they've had some problems doing the iCloud stuff because that wasn't their bread and butter for all this time, where it has been Google's, and Google does a better job of that, I would say. And so that's their one weakness, but they're strong in hardware, they're strong in software, and they're strong in this content, and so that's hard to go against for any of these competitors, that three-prong attack.
And Jim, you mentioned that Apple's been kind of stealthy. Amazon is anything but stealthy in their attempts to sell you content, which I think is a very strong demerit against their devices. If you use the new Kindle Fire, you are being pitched from the get-go. As soon as you turn that thing on, they're trying to sell you something. When you go into your content, they're trying to sell you more content. And it's just beating you over the head constantly with this constant pitch, which I think goes a long way against making this a device that a lot of people are going to want to use. So for me, I think that's a big strike against Amazon as well. They haven't really gotten that balance between this is a great device that I want to own, and this is just a simple content portal that's trying to pitch me stuff all the time.
Well, and they did seem to frame it as a simple content portal, right? That was the whole thing. But then went through a specs list and was like, look at our great content portal, right?
Yeah,
so they did have a bit of a mixed message.
It's almost like the modern-day Sears catalog, where people forget that 100 years ago or whenever it was that Sears got real big, when people who didn't live near an actual Sears and Roebuck retail store, they would get the catalog once a year, and then if they needed any of that stuff, there's this catalog with everything they might need, like the kid needs new jeans. That's where you'd order it from the Sears catalog. You'd keep it next to your phone book. But then you could always get it.
You'd go circle all the toys you want, and you dog ear,
right.
Then you give your mom a list with the page number of all the toys that you wanted.
Right, and I'm not saying it even as criticism. I think it's genius because their main business is being a retailer. But if they can get the Kindle Fire into your hands, then anything they retail is right there, ready for you to buy.
Yeah, I just think that they need to work on getting it to be a tablet that you're going to want to own for the sake of it being a tablet, whereas they're trying to sell you a content device, basically. Whereas Apple's making these great pieces of hardware that you want to own for the sake of the hardware itself. It's got great functionality and it's got great content, whereas basically all that the Kindle Fire has to offer above any other tablet is all that content.
I think that it's funny, in that Kindle presentation, the Amazon presentation, Jeff Bezos seemed really defensive about specs. He talked a lot about tech specs, and I think he really felt the hurt from the reviews of the original Kindle Fire because it wasn't up to snuff, and so he thought he would sort of out-tech everybody with this new version. And I thought that was kind of bizarre because I don't care about multiple input, multiple output, Wi-Fi bandwidth or anything in that. And I think Apple or Amazon's bigger weakness is just in doing software on the device. And it's not that people didn't buy a Kindle Fire because it didn't have a good enough specs. I think it didn't have a good enough experience. And if I was giving Amazon any advice like Jeff Bezos needs my advice, it would be the software experience. I mean, Apple's competency that gets overlooked sometimes is that they write good apps. And not just the operating system, but the apps. And Amazon software, even on the e-ink Kindle, and I bought like 4 of those, it's terrible. I buy it despite their software. So they do all these other things well, and then when they try to write their software, it's just disappointing.
Yeah, and I agree with that completely. I think it is weird that Amazon made such a go out of their way to mention the specs, because that's like an arms race that I don't think they can win. You know, they don't have the hardware experience really to do that. And so, while, you know, Apple is, of course, you know, never been huge on the spec front, but about talking about the specs, more about the usage of them, they'll get into a firefight with Google, and can they really compete with Google on the spec front, especially when Google has advanced knowledge of what Android is going to be doing and what, you know, what Amazon is building on top of. And so there's different hardware and software implementations that they can do ahead of what anything that Amazon can do.
Great. Well, I think we're actually out of time here, but thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate you being here. Terrific talk, and yeah, thanks for giving us the inside info on what it was like to actually be at the event.